Now, there's something that seems to be unique about us as human beings that other animals and species don't really do. We ask these deeper, big questions. Why am I here? What is going on? What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of all of this? How do I make sense of meaning and purpose? And so this is something that we all ask. And the question is, how do we make sense of it? What does this point to? Does this lead to any other sort of big metaphysical, existential questions that help us make sense of why we are here? Where is all this going? And what is the purpose of my life? Now, I want to be very, very clear from the beginning of today's show. This topic, I don't think, is necessarily evidence or proof that Christianity is true. What's up, Travis? I don't think that what I'm going to present here is somehow evidence that there is a God or that Christianity is true. And so it's kind of a little bit strange in a sense that this is showing up in Armin Navabi's book, Why There Is No God, 20 simple responses or 20 common arguments for the existence of God. This isn't normally presented as an argument for God's existence, but in reality, what it is doing, or what it attempts to do, is to show two different alternatives to understanding the question of the purpose of life and life's meaning. And the point here that is made, and I'll try to walk you through this, is to say, look, if God does not exist, then there is no objective meaning or purpose to life. Then life is futile. If God does exist, then life is meaningful. And so that's what we want to look at, is to try to make sense of this existence of life. Now, that is a point that Armin Navabi agrees to. Let me start with the conclusion of his chapter, where Armin writes this. He says, where does he say it? There it is. He goes, this is quotes, there is no single outside force imposing meaning on the events of your life. There is no evidence whatsoever that people's life events conform to some sort of divine plan or predestination. Life is objectively meaningless. Given the size and scope of the universe and our tiny role within it, it's absurd to think that we might have any sort of cosmically vital role. And so that is what Armin writes. Now, as we'll get to his points later on, he then, though, says, well, the lack of external meaning to our lives can grant us a pleasant sense of freedom. We have the ability to create meaning for our lives by setting worthwhile goals, working to improve the lives of those around us, enjoying our time on earth, and making connections to other humans and loving our families. All of these activities are worthwhile, and none of them require the existence of God. So I don't want you to get the idea that, and hey, James, good to see you. I don't want you to get the idea that what I'm saying here is that atheists, just everyone believes there's hopeless, meaningless absurdity, and they're just going to go off and do horrible things. That's not what I'm saying. And that's a common misunderstanding. The atheist response is going to say, yeah, there may be no objective meaning or purpose. It ultimately is absurd. However, we can create meaning for ourselves. And we're going to look at that. And so that's going to be the topic is when we ask these deep, big questions, what is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? There's a Christian response and there is a more atheistic response. And we have to consider these alternatives as we are trying to make sense of the question of, man, do I want to be a Christian or not? Is Christianity true? We want to see, how does this explain other aspects of reality? And so that is going to be the topic today. And as always, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to lay out the Christian argument, or in this case, why is life absurd? The absurdity of life without God. If there is no God, then there is no objective meaning, value, purpose sort of thing. And then life becomes meaningless. And then I'm going to look at Armin Navabi's responses to that. And then I'm going to look at a few Christian responses to Armin Navabi, and ultimately ending by taking your questions and your calls if you want to call in the show. Now, again, a lot of questions have been coming in the live chat, which is amazing, but I can't filter through all of them. So if you do have a question that you want to have me address, please put a Q on the front of it. That way, as I scan the live chat, I can walk through that quickly. So, here's oh, my name is Ryan Pauly, by the way. This is the show Think Well, where I'm trying to train you to think well about the Christian faith and culture so that you can engage the culture well. And so ultimately here, is making sense of, here's two different ways to look at this big question of, is life meaningful? And then allow you to come to that conclusion on which one you think makes the most sense to you. So the first is kind of the Christian case. Now, I forgot to post this in the live chat below. Oh, no, I did. I posted it in the description below on YouTube. And it's a link to an article that written by William Lane Craig, a Christian philosopher. who wrote this article called The Absurdity of Life Without God. And so what I want to walk through with you really quickly is why Christians kind of make this case. And again, this is chapter 15 of Armin's book on why there is no God. And the title of his chapter is Believing in God Provides Meaning and Purpose. Without it, life would be meaningless. And so that's what Armin is addressing. And so I'm going to look at William Lane Craig's defense for the absurdity of life without God, Armin's responses, respond to Armin, and then take your calls and questions. So William Lane Craig starts in his article, The Absurdity of Life Without God, and talking about this idea, look, if there is no God, if there is no immortality, if there is no life after this, then within kind of a more secular, naturalistic, if the only nature exists kind of worldview, then we are the accident and byproduct of nature. We are the result of matter plus time plus chance, and there's no reason for our existence. And ultimately, all we face in the end is death. He talks about this idea, without immortality, there is no hope past the grave. And ultimately, our life really just ends at the grave. And that is what we have. And you have these kind of sayings in culture, right? YOLO, you only live once. That was cool, and it's not cool anymore, I don't think. But the idea was, look, you only live once. Life is over at the grave, so make the most of it. And often when people are using that phrase YOLO, it is followed by an action that is maybe not the smartest, wisest. And the idea is, hey, if I don't have much time left, I might as well have fun. And so this idea of, look, if my life is just going to end at the grave and that's it, and that's where it all stops, then what am I going to do from now until that point? Now, he also then addresses this idea that it's not just true for me personally, but the universe as well. The universe, the ultimate fate of our universe is also death. And he writes this, scientists tell us that the universe is expanding. Everything in it is growing farther and farther apart. And it does so, as it does so, it grows colder and colder, and its energy is used up. Eventually, all the stars will burn out. All the matter will collapse into Death Stars and black holes. There will be no light at all. There will be no heat, be no life. The corpse of dead stars and galaxies ever expanding into the endless darkness and the cold recesses of our space, a universe of ruins. So not only, William Lane Craig says, is life of each individual person doomed, the entire human race is doomed. There is no escape. There is no hope. And so this conclusion, and what is drawn from this, and thanks for the questions, I see them coming in, is this question of, okay, if this worldview is true, if there is no God, and if there is no life after this life, and ultimately my future is death, and the universe's future is death, how can we have transcendent, objective, ultimate meaning or purpose? And the conclusion is there isn't. There isn't ultimate meaning and purpose. So he addresses kind of 3 points here. The absurdity of life without God. He addresses there's no ultimate meaning, there's no ultimate values, and there is no ultimate purpose. Let me quickly address those, and then I'm going to get to Armin's responses as well as the questions I see that are coming in. William Lane Craig writes this, if there is no God, then man and the universe is doomed. Like prisoners condemned to death, we await our unavoidable execution. There is no God and there is no immortality. And what is the consequence of this? It means that life itself is absurd. It means that the life we have is without ultimate significance, value, or purpose. And he says, let's look at each of these. Now, I think that's the first kind of difference between what William Lane Craig is writing and his argument, and what I saw in Armin Navabi's chapter is the title of the chapter was Believing in God Provides Meaning, Purpose, and without it, life would be meaningless. It's missing, I think, a key word there, which would be ultimate meaning and purpose, or objective meaning or purpose, or transcendent meaning or purpose. And it does seem, like I mentioned before, that Armin would agree with that, where he says life is objectively meaningless. That because there's no external source of meaning or purpose placed upon you, it is ultimately or objectively meaningless. But that doesn't mean that you can't create your own meaning, says Armin. And so I think he would agree with this point. So really quickly, why is there no life, no ultimate meaning without immortality or God? And William Lane Craig goes into this. He says, if each individual person passes out of existence when he dies, then what ultimate meaning can be given to his life? Does it really matter if he ever existed at all? Does it really make a difference whether he existed or not existed? Does it make a difference whether our universe existed or not? Ultimately, it's without significance, because if the universe just was never here, then it was never here, and no difference. Or if we show up and we exist for this time and then our universe goes out of existence, ultimately it makes no difference. So there is not this ultimate purpose or ultimate significance. He then says the same is true with individual persons. He writes this, quote, "The contributions of the scientists to advance of human knowledge, the researchers of doctors to alleviate pain and suffering, the efforts of the diplomat to secure peace in the world, the sacrifices of good men everywhere to better the lot of the human race, all of these come to nothing." Right? And that is a question that we should be challenged with and say, look, if our universe is going to face this ultimate death, if we are going to face this ultimate death, we recognize that there are differences. There are people that do good things and people that do bad things. There are people that do things to make things better and there are people that do things to make things worse. But ultimately, if we're all just going to end in the eventual death of our universe and our own death, why does it matter? What is the ultimate significance of doctors and scientists and world peacemakers if ultimately everything is just going to be gone? It's the common analogy that sometimes people use, like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship, right? It's like, okay, yeah, you may make them look nice for the time being, but the ship is going down in an hour. What's the ultimate purpose? I get maybe you have a place to sit for the moment, but ultimately it becomes meaningless. He then goes into this idea, the second one, there's no ultimate value without immortality in God. He writes this, if life ends at the grave, then it makes no difference whether one has lived as Stalin or a saint. Since one's destiny is ultimately unrelated to one's behavior, you may as well just live as you please. Now, atheists often push back and it's like, well, I don't have to believe in God to be a good person. True. And just because and this also doesn't mean Christians are only good because they believe in God or that they're scared of God. And it's not saying that if you reject God, that you're going to start being this evil, horrible person like a Stalin. The question is, if we can set that aside, the question is, if there is no ultimate destiny that is determined by one's behavior, does it matter ultimately whether you live as a Stalin or a saint, whether you love or you hate? If we're all ending up in the same place, is there an ultimate significance? Now you might say, well, yeah, I think I want people to treat me nicer. Okay, you have an immediate significance for sure. The question is there this ultimate significance? Dostoevsky, a Russian novelist, said, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. Right? This idea that if there is no God, as I've talked about many times on the show, then there's not objective right and wrong. That moral values become just an expression of our personal taste or byproducts of our socio-biological evolution and conditioning. Right. And I posted a video on TikTok just a couple of weeks ago talking about objective morality. And I had an atheist respond and say it's not objective. It's a product of culture, and each culture gets to decide. This idea of social contract theory, that each culture decides the contract on how they want to live, and that's what becomes good for them. And I brought up this idea of like torturing babies for fun, right? Is that wrong? And this atheist on TikTok said, no, that was good for some people, and it is still good for people today. I think that is a consistent view. But I think that is a difficult view. I think that's the bullet you got to bite. That's the thing you got to bear in order to live consistently, to say, I think it's wrong to torture and abuse babies for fun. I think it's good to torture babies and for fun. That's what you have to say if really there is no objective morality. If a culture decides that that is true, then that's what's true. But I think that we recognize the wrongness of that, right? Atheist Michael Roos said something to the effect of, the person who says it's right to I think rape children for fun is just as wrong as the person who says that 2 + 2 is 5, right? That there is an objective right and wrongness. And if you say something like that, like you are wrong, in a similar way to say it's wrong that 2 + 2 is 5, you're wrong. It's not true. But that is kind of the struggle here, is if there is no God, many people will argue, including atheists, then that means that there is no objective right and wrong. Then the question is, where is there any sort of moral obligation? Where is there any sense of this idea of this objective meaning and purpose and way in which I am called to live? And that's why William Lane Craig, at least here, argues that without God and without immortality, there's no ultimate values. The last thing that he argues here is that there is no ultimate purpose without immortality and God. He says, if death stands with open arms at the end of life's trail, what is the goal of life? Is it all for nothing? Is there no reason for life? And what about our universe? Is it utterly pointless? If its destiny is a cold grave in the recesses of our outer space, the answer must be yes, it's pointless. And here he addresses in Ecclesiastes, book of the Bible, Ecclesiastes 3, 19 to 20, where the writer says, the fate of the sons of men and the fate of the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage of man over beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place, all come from dust, and all return to the dust. Right? This book, written very much like a modern existential literature than a book of the Bible, but it's like this idea of, look, if there is no God, as the writer writes, it's all vanity, vanity, vanity. Right? It's the futility. This is what the book of Ecclesiastes is trying to show, is the futility of pleasure and wealth and education and political fame and honor. If there is no eternal life, and if there is no God, then I am doomed no matter what we do. And if all there is death, then it's just all vanity. And so this is kind of the argument that is being made here, where it is, okay, what are the options? Right? And the options here with this argument, at least, is to say, look, if God exists, then there is hope for man. But if God does not exist, then all we are left with is despair. Do you understand why the question of God's existence, William Lane Craig writes, is so vital to man? This is why I think atheists are writing books and Christians are writing books. And this is why I'm doing a show and people come on and chat with me and discuss, because this is one of the biggest questions that has a huge, lasting, profound impact on our life, is the question, is there a God? Is there a God who created us, designed us for a purpose, to be in a relationship, to know him and to make him known, that made us for a reason, and now there's meaning and purpose for our lives, and there's right and wrong in the way that he's created us? Or is there no God and we are the product of blind natural evolution, that we are just a physical thing like other physical things, and there's not this ultimate difference, and there's no objective morality, and all we have is just what is the byproduct of our biological evolution or our preferences? Like, these are profoundly deep questions. And so I want to kind of stop there of the initial argument that I think Armin Navabi is responding to. Is the idea of, okay, if there is no God, if there is no afterlife, then there is no objective, ultimate meaning and purpose, and therefore life would be meaningless. Now, I saw some questions come in. I'm hoping they're kind of on the topic that we're addressing here. So let me stop here really quick, address some questions, and then I'm going to get to Armin's chapter. All right. Here's the first one. Is Christian purpose of existence to worship and glorify God? If yes, doesn't that seem pointless? I would say that's part of our purpose. Our purpose is to know God and make him known. And so that's part of the purpose in which God has created us, is to be in a relationship with him. I don't think that's pointless, because it is for our good. It is for our benefit. It is doing the thing that we have been created to do. And it improves our lives and is good for us to be in a relationship with our Heavenly Father. And so I don't think there's a pointlessness to that, because it's doing the thing that we were made to do, and it is what is bringing significance to our lives. And again, and part of worshiping and glorifying God doesn't mean that we just sit there in like an everlasting worship service. That's not what heaven is going to be like. We don't just sit there and sing worship songs forever. What we see all throughout Scripture, that God has created us uniquely with different talents and gifts and abilities. So there's a way in which we live out the way in which God has created us to live. And that can look differently, whether it's in sports, or whether it's public speaking and teaching, or building, or assisting, or whether you're a doctor or a nurse or a business person, or whatever it may be. You can live a life and serve one another and help one another, all while doing the very thing that God has called and created you to do. And that is to live a life that honors and glorifies him. And so I don't think that there is a pointlessness to that, because it's not simply just worshiping God and sitting in some eternal worship service. Even if that were the case, I think then you're doing the thing that you are created to do. and therefore it's not pointless. It has a point. I think that's the very nature of, you can look at a thing around you. I don't know if I have any like ridiculous thing around me. Okay, here's like a syringe for my kid's medicine, if you are watching on YouTube. And it's like, well, it only does one simple little thing. It like sucks up, medicine and pushes it out. And it's like, so if I use it for the thing it's made to do, like, is that pointless? And it's like, well, no, because it's doing the very thing it was created to do, which has a point. It is to be able to give medicine. And maybe there's a bigger thing there that I'm missing of, bringing healing and restoration, all that kind of stuff with medicine. But I think you get the point I'm trying to get across, is when you're doing what you were created to do, then that is the point of life, and therefore it is not pointless. Travis, good to see you here. You asked the question, is Christian purpose of existence to enact laws that reflect a strict interpretation of biblical laws, including capital punishment? No, that is not the purpose of Christian existence, is to enact all of those laws. Capital punishment, I think there's a wide range of Christian views on capital punishment, and maybe we could talk about that towards the end. I think the point here, though, is that there are different ways in which Christians see living out the Christian life in a pluralistic society that we live in today. And so I am not one to say that we should force Christian views on people. I do not believe that we should be making Christian laws in law and say, well, because the Bible says so, all of you have to follow it. I believe in religious freedom. I believe in a freedom of conscience. And in order for people to have a freedom of conscience, a freedom of thought, a freedom of belief, and a freedom of religion, then they have to be free to practice their religion, which would include religions not Christianity. And so what I would argue for is that the laws that I would argue should be put in American laws would be based off of natural law, which is understood through general revelation, through our reason and arguments and evidence, not specifically that which is in the Bible. I don't think that every immoral thing in the Bible should be made illegal. So I don't think that's the purpose of our existence. I think the purpose of our existence is to make God known. And so we can do that through preaching, through persuasion, through conversations like I try to have here on the show, not necessarily through making a strict interpretation of laws and then putting that into place. Why is an eternal purpose, Travis asks, better than no purpose at all? Well, I think that and I'll get to here in a little bit, but I think that's the point that William Lane Craig is trying to make, is that living a life that is purposeless is absurd, is depressing, is just, it's a sad life to be like, there's no purpose. And I think even Armin addresses that. I think William Lane Craig addresses that. I'll get into that here in a little bit. And so the fact is that we all live for a purpose. We all live with a purpose in mind. The question is, which worldview can actually ground some sort of meaningful, purposeful existence? And that's the question that we are trying to get to here. All right. I don't see any other cues. And hey, let's see, Nitty, I don't know what you're being mean about, because I'm not reading every single comment. I can't read every comment. I'm just looking for ones that have cues at the beginning, and therefore, trying to kind of move through this. So if you have a question specifically, put a cue there, but thanks for being here, Nitty. Appreciate it. All right. So Armin is going to respond to this sort of argumentation and say, in reality, he says, quote, religion itself does not assign meaning to an individual's life. Instead, individuals choose to give their lives meaning through the activities they pursue and the convictions they hold. Meaning can be found outside of religion. That is true. You can find meaning outside of religion. You say, hey, for me, this is meaningful. To love my family, that's meaningful. To try to help poor people, that's meaningful. That's true. The question is, we're talking about ultimate meaning, objective meaning, transcendent meaning. That's what we're talking about here. And that's why I tried to make that point clear in the initial argument. He then continues and says, seeking one's own meaning for life can be far more fulfilling than following the rules of an outside religious authority. Now, I think it's interesting here that he contrasts finding my own meaning to just following rules, right? And I think it's there seems to be kind of an opinion or a bias or something implanted to where the Christian view, like I would not see the Christian life as me just following a bunch of rules. Like that's a very weird way to look at it. And I would not see it like that way. And I don't think that's what's even happening. The Christian life is being able to be in a relationship with God and recognizing that just like with me and my son, that if I am a good father, and I'm not always a good father, but if I'm a good father and I'm creating rules or barriers or expectations for my son, then they are for his good, for his protection, for his benefit. And when he realizes that I love him, that I care about him, that I want good things for him, then being in that relationship where he is following what I'm asking him is for his good. It's not just about following rules, but it's about recognizing that this loving father cares about him and his life is better by being in that relationship. You see, I think that's the very thing with the beginning and Satan's temptation to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. In a sense, it was to get Adam and Eve to question God's goodness and his care for them. Did you not realize that God is hiding this from you? God doesn't want you to know right and wrong like he does. It was getting them to question God, where they start to think, no, I want what I want and I want it now. And I always say this is like the cause of all kids' rebellion against their parents is this idea of, if you believe that what your parents are asking you to do is best for you, you don't go, oh, I have to follow their rules. You go, of course, that's what I'm doing. Right? If it's like mom and dad come and you say, I got a plan for your life, kid. This weekend, we're going to Hawaii. You're not like, rules. You're like, let's go. Right? But if it's like, hey, I got a plan for you this weekend, you're going to clean your room. It's like, rules, not let's go. It's when you don't think that their plan for you is best that all of a sudden you try to figure out, I want what I want and I want it now. And that's not what I want. I want this freedom. And I think the same is true with us. If we don't see God's plan as best, then we have that belief of, I need to get out from this plan. This is an overbearing, rules-heavy plan I want to get out from, and now I want to live my life the way that I want to live it. But if we recognize or believe that God's plan is best, that God is good, he created us and loves us, and the things that he's asking us to do, while they may not make sense, just like every rule I have for my son doesn't make sense to him, is ultimately for our good, then to submit ourselves to the will of God is the best thing that we can do. So I agree with our men that we can find some sort of meaning without religion and without God, but I don't agree that it's more fulfilling, because you're not doing the very thing that you were created to do. And therefore, what are you fulfilling in that sense? Now, again, he addresses this like in every single chapter. And I've said it a million times. He's like, just because you believe something doesn't make it true. It's true. I agree with Armin on that. And he kind of continues to kind of walk through that point. And he goes, look, it's possible to have meaningful life without religious convictions when you seek validation from outside sources. Now, here's what I thought was an interesting point. Armin writes this: when you seek validation and meaning from outside sources, you risk being failed by the same institution that previously gave meaning to your life. And notice what he's doing here. It's no longer a meaning and purpose come from God, but now it is you're seeking validation and meaning from an outside source, not God, but he says you risk being failed by the same institution that previously gave meaning to your life. So it's recognizing here, like, yeah, if your meaning and purpose just come from the church may fail you, right? But we're not saying your meaning and purpose come from a specific institution. We're saying that your meaning and purpose come from God. And if the Christian God does exist, then he is not one that is going to fail us. And therefore, he is someone that we can put our hope and our trust in. And so that's what we have to consider. He then goes on and says, moreover, the culture of religion can lead to identical group thinking and loss of objectivity. You know, it's interesting. I just talked to an atheist who I had come speak to one of our Maven groups, who said that, in a sense, that this person was surprised that we would have real atheists come and challenge our groups and actually say to our group, everything, like, not everything that you believe is actually true. You believe false things. Now, what this atheist then said was that there were some atheist groups that asked this atheist to speak, and the atheist said, I'm going to tell you the same message, that not everything you believe is true. And the atheist group said, we don't want to hear it. No, because we are people of reason and we hold the truth, and no, that's not true. We're not going to listen to that. And this atheist said, isn't it interesting that an evangelical Christian group was willing to be told, hey, by the way, you could be wrong, and actually consider the fact they could be wrong, when the atheist group wasn't. Now, that's not true of every single evangelical or every single atheist, but it made the atheists I talked to go, isn't that interesting? That the claim is often made that the culture of religion leads you to groupthink and the loss of objectivity, this closed-mindedness. And here this person was saying, no, I actually found that true of the skeptic communities that were asking me to come speak. So we all can find ourselves in cultures that have identical groupthink and the loss of objectivity. That's why we all have to open up our minds and consider the fact of, could I be wrong? Is it possible that I could be wrong? And therefore, I actually want to listen to your ideas as if I could actually learn something, not just I listen so I can prove you wrong. But maybe I could learn something. Maybe you can show me why I'm wrong. And I think that was a really interesting point that Armin makes here. He then goes over this idea. Actually, I don't know if I want to address that whole point. But he says this idea that religion pretty much is this learned helplessness created by religion. Therefore, it opens a way for charlatans and con artists to take advantage of gullible, vulnerable people. Now, again, recognize that is I think, I don't know a better way to say this, an outsider perspective, making Christianity seem not very good, right? It's like saying sickness is just a false idea created by doctors to con you out of your money. Well, that's true if sickness is that. And is it possible that some doctors use sicknesses to con people out of their money? Sure. My dad's a dentist. He tells stories of people coming into his office needing dental work and saying, the other dentist told me that I needed $2,000 worth of dental work because I have X, X, Y, and Z wrong with my teeth. My dad's like, nope, your teeth are fine. Right? We know mechanics to do the same, whatever it may be. Whenever you have a specialty job, sure, people take advantage of it. The other option is that we actually are helpless, that we actually have this thing called sin, to where I am unable to save myself from. Just like someone with cancer cannot save themselves, they need the help from someone else. And therefore, it's not just charlatans and con artists, but there's actually a true cure, Jesus Christ, who can forgive me of my sins. That should be the question is that even a possibility on the table? And therefore, let's discuss the truth of Christianity rather than just simply making a claim religion is a learned helplessness, so charlatans and con artists can take advantage of the gullible and vulnerable people. Instead, it's like, no, maybe actually it's true. Let's look at some reasons and evidence for it. Armin, do you have evidence that religion is nothing but learned helplessness? That would be my question back. Now, here's Armin's response, and then I'm going to take I see a few more questions have come in, and then I'm going to go back to some responses to Armin. And then again, if you want to call in the show, I'm taking calls as well. Armin then says, we are free to create our own meaning. He says this quote, part of the beauty and wonder of being alive is the opportunity to make our own choices, create your own meaning. Instead of having a predetermined destiny or some powerful guiding hand calling the shots in your life, you're free to seek out your own meaning and value by making your own choices and discovering your own unique path. He then says what I quoted before, there's no single outside force imposing meaning or events on your life. Life is objectively meaningless, Armin writes. Given the size and scope of the universe and our tiny role within it, it is absurd to think that we might have any sort of cosmic vital role. However, he writes, the lack of external meaning to our lives can grant us a pleasant sense of freedom. Rather than being tethered to outside forces, we're free to explore the universe, seek answers to profound questions, or simply in simple pleasures like sex and food. We have the ability, he writes, to create meaning for our lives by setting worthwhile goals, working to improve the lives of those around us, enjoying our time on earth, making connections to other humans and loving families. All of these activities are worthwhile, and none of them require the existence of God. And that is where the chapter ends. Now, really quickly, if I can maybe address this actually before I get to questions. William Lane Craig in his article raises, I think, an interesting question or an interesting challenge. And it's to this. How do we make sense of Armin when he says life is objectively meaningless, that it is absurd to think that we have any sort of cosmic vital role? However, at the same time, there are worthwhile, meaningful activities. What does it mean to have a meaningful, worthwhile activity when there is no objective meaning? And that's the question is, can I say, well, for me, it's meaningful to help people? Sure. So there's absolutely a way in which you can see that's meaningful. But the question is, ultimately, how is that meaningful? Ultimately, how is that worthwhile? Again, the common analogy of organizing deck chairs on a sinking ship. Like, it's like painting a building that has dynamite strapped to it and is about to be imploded in 2 minutes. It's like, you can say, well, I find meaning in making this building look pretty. And it's like, okay, that's okay, but we're blowing it up in 5 minutes. What's the point? That seems absurd, right? That's the challenge, and that's the question. And to make this point, and I'll stop after this point, Craig writes this section where he says about the only solution an atheist can offer to this face of the absurd life without God is to say that we can live a life of bravely, that we can recognize its absurdity, but then choose to love one another. He then says this: the fundamental problem with this solution, however, is that it is impossible to live consistently and happily within such a worldview. He goes, if one lives consistently, he will not be happy. So if you live consistently and you say life is meaningless, pointless, absurd, it's all pointless and nothingness, then you're not going to be happy. However, he says, if one lives happily, it's only because he is not consistent. So if you're like, no, I'm happy because I create my own meaning, then he's going to claim that that's not consistent. And he looks at Francis Schaeffer, who he says explains this point well, and where he writes this: modern man, says Schaeffer, resides in a two-story universe. In the lower story is a finite world without God, where life is absurd, as we have seen. In the upper story, and I think Armin would agree to, right? In the lower story, life objectively is meaningless. That it's absurd to think there's some sort of transcendent cosmic meaning to life. In the lower story is a finite world without God. Here's absurd. In the upper story are meaning, value, and purpose. Now, modern man lives in the lower story because he believes there is no God, but he cannot live happily in such an absurd world. Therefore, he continually makes the leap of faith into the upper story to affirm meaning, value, and purpose, even though he has no right to, since he does not believe in God. William Lane Craig then says, why is there no meaning of life? He says, first, in the area of meaning, we saw that without God, there is no meaning, yet philosophers continue to live as though life does have meaning. For example, Sartre argued that one may create meaning for this life by freely choosing to follow a certain course of action. Now, Craig argues, this is utterly inconsistent. It is inconsistent to say that life is objectively absurd and then to say one may create meaning for his life. If life really is absurd, then man is trapped in the lower story, and to try to create meaning in life represents a leap to the upper story. But Sartre has no basis for this leap. Without God, there can be no objective meaning in life. Sartre's program, Craig writes, is actually an exercise in self-delusion. Sartre is really saying, let's pretend that life has meaning, and this is just fooling ourselves. The point is this, and I'll stop here, Craig writes, if God does not exist, then life is objectively meaningless. But man cannot live consistently and happily knowing that life is meaningless. So in order to be happy, he pretends that life has meaning, or that he creates his own meaning. But this is entirely inconsistent, for without God, man and the universe are without any real ultimate significance. So this is, I think, just an interesting thought to kind of work through on both sides to say, okay, really, how do we boil this down if there is no God? And let's say, even say Armin Navabi is right, that there's no objective meaning in life. There's no objective purpose. Life is objectively meaningless, and it's absurd to think there's any sort of ultimate role. Then what does it mean to say, but I have these worthwhile goals? Why does it matter? So you enjoy your time on earth, but at the end, it's just death. If you don't enjoy your time on earth, the end is death. You can make world peace, or you can make war. You can live as a saint or a sinner. You can have these connections to other people, or you can live in isolation. Ultimately, we all wind up at the same point, and it's a point in which there is death and we cease to exist, and there's no memories or ultimate justice or judgment. Why does it matter? And again, is it not somehow connected to that ultimate question? All right, let me jump back to your questions. There's a few other points here in the William Lane Craig article that we can address, but I know I keep saying I'm going to get to your questions, and so let me walk through this. So again, if you have a question, put a Q first, and then write your question out that you want me to address, or again, use that link and call on the show. I'll start taking callers now as well. Can you state that owning another person as property is ultimately wrong? Capital punishment for Sunday activity. So, yes. So we can say that owning people inappropriately is wrong. Exodus 21 says this, that if you steal a man and are found in possession of him, or you are found in possession of a stolen man, then you deserve the death penalty. And so we recognize that it is wrong to own people inappropriately. Now, what we see owning in Scripture, and again, this is where there's nuance here, is that in Scripture it talks about owning people as in that you sell yourself to them to pay off a debt. So there's no banks in order to get loans. And so, hey, if I'm going to sell myself to you because, hey, I owe you $10,000 and I don't have $10,000. And so I sell myself to you in a sense to work off that $10,000. When it's worked off, the debt is gone and I'm free to go. In a sense, you own me during that time, but it is not in an inappropriate way. And so that's one way which we could say, yes, it is wrong to own people inappropriately. Or the capital punishment for the death for Sunday activity. What Scripture is trying to point out is, look, there are things that are actually wrong, and wrong things deserve punishment. And one thing that we saw in Scripture, what God was trying to make clear, is the purpose or the seriousness of sin, right? And we all, I think, for most of us, have this understanding of that there are sins, there are evils that are so wrong, someone should deserve the death penalty. Now, unless you're completely against capital punishment and don't believe it in any case, we see, okay, for someone who murders, mass murderer, they should deserve the death penalty, surely, right? And so we say, okay, if something is so bad, the issue with us is that we don't see the seriousness of evil and of sin. And we even see in the book of Acts, Ananias and Sapphira received the death penalty for lying. They lied to God and they dropped dead. And what Scripture is trying to get through to us is that we often only see bad things as like really bad things, but we don't see these other bad things like lying, stealing, cheating, adulterous thoughts, hating your brother. My pastor preached in Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus says, if you hate someone, it's like you murdered them. Like, we don't think that's bad or as bad. And now I'm not saying that all sins are equal, but what Scripture I think is trying to point out to say, look, we are fallen, broken, sinful human beings who deserve death. And to try to think of ourselves as, no, I'm good enough to where I can get myself into heaven, I don't need Jesus, is a delusional thought. And I think that's what Scripture is trying to, the point that Scripture is trying to make. Travis asks, why doesn't God have a purpose to spread his message himself? Relying on humans with their cognitive flaws seems error-prone if he asks them to spread the message ultimately written by humans. I think that's a great question. Like, could God have just done it all himself? Sure. Why did he choose to use us? I'm not completely sure, but it's amazing that he does. And yeah, there are mistakes, but I think there's value. I think we can say, look, he's trying to teach us a lesson, just like the same as with kids. And Travis, I know you got a kid, but it's like with us and kids, I can ask my son to do something and I know it's not going to be done well. Well, then why don't I just do it? Because ultimately, if I just did everything, he would not learn things that are valuable to learn. So my son is 2.5. We make him take his plate from the table over to the trash and dump food into the trash that's left on his plate, and then take his plate over to the sink and put his plate in the sink. Now this morning, he took his breakfast plate and went to put it up in the sink. And as he put it up, he flips it over and whatever crumbs that were left on the plate fall on the floor. So now I got a second job, is now I got to pick up crumbs off the floor. So it's accident prone. It's error prone. Do I go, fine, I'm never going to ask him to put his plate away again. Let's just do it myself because now it will be done perfectly. Well, if I did that, I am going to short circuit my son's learning. He is learning valuable things. And so I think that God has desired to use us. Yes, God could just do everything himself and do it perfectly, but there's a beauty and a goodness for our benefit to use us in his plan, knowing that, yes, we are error prone and we make mistakes, but I think it only benefits us. I think it's a goodness to us. All right, I see a caller came in here for a second. I just have a few other questions I'm looking at here. All right, there's a ton of questions. Let's jump over the caller and then we'll a few more thoughts. Let me pull you out of the guest room here. All right, Mirza, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hello. Hey, thank you for calling in.
Yes, hi. Sorry, your link. Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. I love talking to you. I love discussing things with you. Your link does not work. The last part after slash does not get automatically in, so I had to type it in. What is it? D2, D9, D2, C5, D52.
Okay, let me...
just so you know. Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat again and see if that works and makes it better. Thank you for letting me know. All right. So what is on your mind today?
So yeah, so a couple of points. I kind of went through this exercise. Let's say there's no meaning or purpose in life. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna just sit there doing nothing, right? And then you'll get hungry, so you have to get food, and then you'll need money, so you get a job, and so on. So it's not the meaning that drives our life, but our drives. We have natural needs. We want other people to like us. We want to be recognized. We have people we love, and so on. You can't really. I mean, I don't think logic really determines our life. And second, things like meaning, purpose, these are not real things. These are objects in our mind that helps us navigate reality. Reality is just a collection of objects. Asking what the meaning of life is asking what the color of is like asking what the color of life is or what the rate of return of life is or something. This is just the now if we did not have drives, there would be no reason for us to do anything, but we can't help but be human and live human lives and care about things. Like if you told me, there's no logical reason to love my kids, does that change anything? Of course not, right? I'm still going to love them. There's no way you can change that. So that's my point.
Yeah. So, and I think that's good. And I think you're onto something there. And I think it's good to flesh out because the question, there's a few things that come to mind. Is number one is if asking the meaning or purpose of life is meaningless, as you kind of pointed, you kind of talked about a category fallacy. What's the color of life? It's like you can't even ask that question. Then what if someone comes along and says, my drive is to treat people like human guinea pigs, and I'm just going to experiment on human people and mistreat them and murder them and do everything for my own benefit. That is what my drives are driving me to do. Would you say, hey, well, that's what, oh, absolutely. And so would you say, go for it?
So it's not, no, I wouldn't, but my drive is to, not get experimented on. So that's the thing, right? There are people who think that way and I don't care because I think this way. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. Absolutely. And so that's the question is, would we actually just say, your drive is just different from mine? Or can we actually say, no, your drive is wrong? That what you've done is wrong? Because I think that...
What difference would that make, though? What difference would that make?
Well, I think one is it allows us to live consistently because that is the way in which we act and we live and we respond to actions. So when we
live consistently, right. We live consistently and they live consistently. And we can say they're wrong and they can say we are wrong. There's no, our way to know who's right in a way that we can do an experiment, right? Like in physics, black holes exist or they don't exist, and then they do an experiment and see who's right. Here, there is no, some sort of independent view, but that doesn't matter. I still have my values, and I love my kids, and that person has their values, and they want to torture people. I don't really care, right, what their values are. I'm not gonna let them torture my kids.
Yeah, so I think that we can do experiments. However, as you just said, you said, I have my values. But then to ask the question, what is the value of life is also a meaningless question. And so that's where I would say individually, one cannot live consistently and say there are no values to life. There is no ultimate purpose or meaning. And to ask the question, what is the meaning is a nonsense question. But then to say at the same time, I have my meaning and I have my values. How is that a consistent view?
I have my drives. I have my nature. I am programmed the way I am, right? And also, what is a value? What is a value? Value of something is to someone, right? Value of I don't know, my grandmother's ring is of value to me, but in itself is just a rock with metal on it or something. You know what I mean? The value is there's no outside value. There's no value outside of mind. There's no value outside. You know what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah.
The meaning is to somebody. The value is to somebody. There's no meaning. The value of my life is to me. Who else could it be to?
So I would say this. I would say that you're right in that there are things that we see as valuable and others do not. So, for example, I just saw someone spent like $4 million buying Shohei Ohtani's 40th home run baseball. Like for whatever reason, saw that as worth $4 million. I maybe would give him $20 for it. Like, I just don't care. That's of no value to me. And so we recognize there are things like that. At the same time, we recognize there are things that do actually have value. Like, we would not value a human being equal to that of a cockroach. If I started exterminating humans, because if I started exterminating humans like cockroaches, like Hitler did, we look at that and say Hitler was wrong, that he is one of the most evil people in the world, that the German doctors that tested on born babies and experimented on humans like they were lab rats, we judge them and put them to death as being evil, wrong people. And so we recognize there's something deep within us that says they are actually wrong, because humans are more valuable than cockroaches. And so while there are things that value is subjective, well, again, a cockroach might think I'm valuable, but the point is that you're not. That's an objective truth.
Right, exactly. So when you say there's something deep inside us, that's your drive, that's your nature. You feel what you feel. You feel that way towards humans, but not towards cockroaches, because that's the way our nature made us. That's the way the program. It's not some sort of object outside of human mind that exists. It's just part of who we are, part of how we see the world. You cannot see reality outside of your own mind. You cannot see. So you think that these things like value and purpose and morality, you think that these things are part of reality because they're part of your mind. But reality is just a collection of objects that interact with each other, And that's fine. That is fine. We have our nature. We have to obey our nature. We have to eat. We have to take care about those we love, and it doesn't matter if it's universal or not. It's part of our programming. That's just the way it is. So let me ask you a question. Let's say there is a God, and God says that you and your family have to be killed because they're on a piece of land that He gave to His chosen people. Would that be moral because it came from God, or would you be like, "F you, buddy"?
So, okay, so that question came up last week, and I do want to address this, but there's, if I can really quick jump back to something you said, where I would agree with you, but I would have a challenge or a thought to ask. And you say, well, our morality is just, it's built into us. It's part of our nature. And I would agree in a sense, right? I think our morality is deep down to where all of us can look at evil, horrendous acts, and we just know that it's wrong. I think deep down we go,
not all of us.
Absolutely. Right. Well, I would use the argument, right? Again, I'm speaking more broadly. If we can look at this phone and say, I know it's black, and someone goes, well, I think it's white. And you don't go, well, maybe it is white. We would say, well, then there's something horribly colorblind and broken with your eyes. If you honestly think it's white, or you were taught your colors wrong, or you're lying to me and you're just messing around, right? We recognize, we know it's black. And for the person to be like, I think the phone is white, there's just something wrong or broken or messed up. And I think the same is what I'm saying with morality, of that we can look at these horrendous evil acts and we can know that it's wrong, that deep within us, unless we are severely distorted in our moral compass, we know that it's wrong. The question is, which worldview can actually make sense of that deep-seated understanding? If I am the byproduct of evolution and natural selection, and that there is no design or purpose built into my body, then that is simply just my programming. If someone has been programmed different, then we can't actually say something is objectively wrong. All we can say is it's different. And so I would say that in a more atheistic, naturalistic kind of view, you can claim that things are wrong, but you can't provide an objective support and foundation for it, versus if the view that God does exist, then I actually have an objective foundation because God has created us. God is good. He created us to be good, and therefore goodness is a reflection of His nature. And so I think that's the where I agree is it's a deep understanding that we have, unless there's been something twisted and broken in us. The question is which worldview can actually explain it. Now, I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions on that. I think that's an important point.
The question is, if there is a God, and God determines morality, and it says, your family is on a land I gave to my chosen people, they should come and kill you all, right? That would be objectively good. It comes from God. But
So I
you
think
don't want that because it hurts you and your family. So there's no objective God. You know what I'm trying to say? Um, yes, yes. There is. You cannot go against your nature. Basically, it doesn't matter what the objective truth is if your nature tells you something different. Fact, did the whole thing that all kids do. They say, "What if my blue is your red or something?" And there's no way to know, right? If I see red color as blue and they see blue color as red, there's no way to communicate that or to know. So yeah, in some things can be the way you can tell who's right and who's wrong is you make a prediction and you test it. But for some things, there's just no way to do that. Like in religion, there's how many denominations of Christianity, and there'll always be that many denominations of Christianity because they all have the same information and they reach their conclusion, and no new information is coming to settle the argument. So, yeah. But anyways, I'm off topic there. The point is, you have your nature, and it doesn't matter what the objective reality is. It's what your nature is driving you to do. It wants you to protect your. And why are we as a society? Why are we as a society funding genocide in Gaza, for example? If we all know it's wrong and this is bad, yet this is happening. Why is that? I mean,
so Mirza,
clearly there are people who actually think that that's morally right, and what are you going to do, right?
Yeah. So Mirza, can I ask you this? It sounds like all we can do is what our nature drives us to do. So would you be a determinist that we are just driven by our natures, or do you think that we as humans have free will and that we can actually make choices based on reasoning that goes against instincts?
Why would you go against instincts?
Because if I have a feeling like, man, I really wish that person was dead, can I actually go against that and choose not to kill them? Like the question is do you think that we have free will?
Yeah.
Or are we simply driven by our nature?
Why wouldn't you want to kill them?
Well, that's beside the point. I'm trying to just ask the question if you
No, that is the point. You have contradicting drives. So you go with the stronger one. You know, I don't kill other people because I don't want myself to be killed. Right.
But am I determined by the stronger drive? Whatever drive is stronger, does that determine my action? Or am I a free being who can evaluate two different drives and make a choice on that?
Right. So drives are not surface level. They're deep down, and based on them, you evaluate your environment and make decisions. You know, you don't just feel hunger and munch food, right? You plan, you think about your health, you think about your future, but ultimately the reason we live is because we are compelled to love, to be accepted, and the reason we have empathy, we have sense of fairness, we have logic. Otherwise, why would you live? You'd be like a computer with no operating system. It would just sit there.
Right. So, okay. So it seems like you are agreeing that there is at least some sense of human freedom and free will to choose choices and make decisions, that we are not determined like a computer program. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes. We are not determined. Our choices are not determined. Our drives are ultimately what drives us, but our choices are not determined, right?
So, okay. So that's why I'm having a hard time making sense of that. You say our drives are what drive us. So,
right.
But then I also can make choices. So those seem, I'm trying to make sense. It seems contradictory to me. Are my drives driving me, or am I driving me?
Yes. Your drives are driving you. You are your drives. Your drives are driving you. You are a collection of your drives as a person. Your love of your kids, your need to eat, all these things that make you you. That's you. That's what you want. You cannot want something outside of you. You're asking, what if I want something that I don't want? That's contradiction, right?
Can we go against our drives?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
But you would do it for, why would you do that?
We could have a whole range of other reasons of wanting to be selfless and put my needs to the side and to help others. And I think the point I'm trying to make here is
so that's a different drive.
Oh, sure. There's different ideas, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that it sounded like at the beginning that you were a determinist, that saying it's just our drives that drive us and that we have no choice. And then the question is, well, then how do we actually punish people for doing wrong as if they chose wrong? But it sounds like, no, you are saying that we make choices. And so the issue here is with morality is that in order to live consistently, the way in which we look is we see people who make evil choices and commit heinous acts, and we recognize that is evil, that is wrong. And then we see people and stories of people giving of their life, of people sacrificing themselves. The William Lane Craig article that I'm walking through tells a story of a plane flight that was leaving Washington, D.C. and smashed into a bridge, crashed in the Potomac River. And in the icy waters, one of the passengers continued to pass the rescue ladder off to other people. 6 different times he pushed someone else to the ladder instead of climbing up himself, and then he ended up dying. And as a country, the whole nation looked at that and said, what respect, what affirmation, what selflessness, that was such a good act, what a value and a wonderful thing that he did. And the question is, that assumes that there are values, that there is objective goodness, that what he did to be selfless was good, rather than evolution that seems more like a selfish dean of a survival of the fittest. If I am just simply built to survive, then what should drive me is the thing that helps me survive, and therefore to pass the ladder off to someone else would be the stupidest thing that I could do, not necessarily the most noble thing that I could do. And so I think as a society, we live as if there are these objective values and goodnesses and purposes. And in what a meaningful life is to live a life of sacrifice, of love. And the question is, can we make sense of that? And if in your view, you're saying to ask what's the meaning of life is a nonsense question, yet at the same time, we live as if there is a meaning and purpose in life with objective values, that's where there's an inconsistency.
Right. I mean, there's the evolutionary theories as to why that is, and one, the more if one person sacrifices and to save others, then more people survive, which means there are more genes in it. So there's a convoluted. But the point is, can you be something you're not? Can you be not your nature? You thinking that your nature is this universal value. But your nature is part of you. That's why you see it as something core. And it is core to you. Like you said, killing cockroaches versus people, right? But if you're cockroach, you'll be the other way around. They'll be like killing people and not each other. It's really is arbitrary. Why do we eat chicken and not dogs? Why are some people saying that it's great to bomb another country and other people are saying it's wrong? Why? And then And let's say there is some sort of, let me ask you this. Let's say there's some sort of universal value to human life, right? Some sort of greater value that comes from God. Does that mean that, say, boulder falling off a mountain is going to be reluctant to crush a person as opposed to animal or an object? No, right? Boulders don't care.
Right, boulders aren't
but so there's no value outside our own minds, and a lion wouldn't think twice to eat you.
Wait, hold on. Why is it if a boulder falls off a mountain and kills someone, why does it then follow that there's no value outside of our mind? I don't understand the logic there.
Because the only place where you find value is our mind, right? If God created us to be special, then something outside us should treat us special, like other animals, boulders.
This is interesting. So this connects to what I talked about in the show last week. By any chance, did you catch last week's show?
Might have.
On the argument for God's existence based on logical absolutes, and that there are these concepts that we have in our mind.
I saw the recording and I left a comment.
Okay. So I think the point is this, that you're making, and I would agree with you, that you don't find the concept of value outside of the mind. That you can't dig in a field and find a value just sitting there. There are some things that we see as more valuable or others or whatever, but the concept of value is not something that exists outside the mind. However, that does not logically follow, therefore it doesn't exist, because it does exist in the mind. It also doesn't follow that it is something that is mind dependent in the sense that we made it up. But the fact that value is transcendent meaning that if and this is where you kind of talk about, well, a human sees themselves as more valuable, but a cockroach would think they are more valuable. Well, I don't think a cockroach thinking they're more valuable than humans makes them more valuable than humans, just like me thinking that the Earth is the center of our solar system doesn't make the Earth the center of our solar system. Just because I think something does not make it true, and just like Armin says many times in this book, just because we believe something does not make it true. And so we realize that we can have values that are actually twisted, right? I can have twisted values where I can think that a piece of garbage is valuable and a block of gold or something is not valuable, or whatever it may be, where you can actually switch value on things. And I think that we've done this in many ways in our culture, where we place a high price tag on something and then everyone goes, oh, that's valuable, I want it. But the thing that they're buying is worthless. And so I think that we can switch this. And so what I would say, though, is that what the point is that because there is objective value, that there actually are things that are more valuable than others, a human is more valuable than a cockroach, objectively, and to think otherwise is wrong.
To us.
And the fact, I don't think it's just to us, it's objectively true, it's outside of us, and therefore we believe it.
To cockroaches, would they believe it? Right? If cockroaches were sentient, would they?
Mirza, so it doesn't. So that's why I just try to address. Just because they believe something different, does that make it true?
So if there were sentient cockroaches, and they believe that we are cockroaches and they are smart, and we thought, what would the difference be, right?
Well, the difference is what they believe is actually going against an objective fact of reality. Just like if I believe, well, that's the argument I'm making, and is that just like if I believe that the Earth is the center of the solar system, doesn't that make the Earth the center of the solar system?
Right, but that's a different type of existence. That's actual object in space, not your mental determination or value, as you call it, or purpose.
So
right.
if value is simply a mental determination, then, and if there is no objective value, then we can't actually say one thing is more valuable than another. Then all value is completely meaningless. And therefore, to try to give any sorts of value, like when there was women's suffrage and no women had rights, and for people to stand up and say, I am a valuable human being, I deserve rights, we would go, no, you're not. There is no value. Right? For slaves to say, there are valuable human beings, we deserve rights. We go, no, you're not valuable. Nothing's valuable. Right? What does it mean? Right. Okay. So you're agreeing that
it's valuable to somebody. Right. So we, again, it comes to our nature. Our nature is not determined by God, but it is part of us. We cannot go against our nature. You feel strongly that human life is worth something and not cockroaches, because that's part of your nature. You recognize similarity between you and other people. Cockroach will do the same. You say, oh, look at us. We have 6 legs, and those big squishy bags of water are nothing. You can kill them. Right. And maybe, right. There was time where slavery was thought of moral, and now we don't think of it as moral anymore. And in the future, maybe everybody will be vegan, and they'll look at us as horrible monsters who ate baby animals. The thing is, how would you know if something is objectively true? How would you, you go by your feeling. I feel this is right, so it must be objectively true.
So I don't think it's
you cannot demonstrate that. I can demonstrate that Earth goes around the sun, but I cannot demonstrate that human life has more value, or that, you know what I mean. It has more value to me. That's all I can say, but I cannot say it has more value outside of humans, to cockroaches, to rocks, to lions.
So let me ask you something, because I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding you. In that section, you made the comment, I believe, that you said slavery was moral. Is that right? That you said that?
That was taught to be moral, right? That's what they taught.
That is what they taught, but was it?
How could you tell differently?
Well, no. So the question is, if there is no objective,
is eating meat moral? Is eating meat moral?
Hold on, right? Don't change the topic. Hold on, Mirza. Sorry. Hold on. The question is, when they taught that slavery was a moral good, were they right?
Right.
Yes or no?
In what sense, right? In like universal sense, or in my personal sense? In my personal sense, I don't like it. I think it's wrong. I don't want to see other people suffer. But there's no like why is it in the Bible? Why is smashing babies against the rocks in the Bible? Because that's what they believed at the time. Why was it there if it's wrong? Why was it there?
Okay. Hold on. That's kind of a red herring in a sense. It's a different kind of conversation.
Right.
It's the point I'm trying to make is simply this: we're not here to kind of discuss every situation that's mentioned in every single place. The question here is there at least any sense of objective morality? Because if there's no objective morality, then it wasn't wrong to do any of the things that you mentioned, like smashing babies into rocks or whatever that may be. But the issue is, if there is objective morality, that we can look at a different society and say X is actually wrong, therefore you can now criticize the Bible as having wrong things in it. And so the question is this: can we look at those in the 1800s in the American South who were teaching that slavery was a moral good, and can we say you are wrong? Or were they right because there is no objective morality and therefore it is a matter of preference? That is what they preferred and therefore they were right. So the question is morality like your favorite flavor of ice cream? I think chocolate is bad and gross, but you think it's good and you're right because that's what you think. And if they thought slavery was good, then they were right that slavery is good. And I think slavery is wrong and that's right for me, but there's no way to actually judge them as being wrong. And so that's what the question comes down to is, when they were teaching that slavery was good, were they right? And it seems like you would have to say in your view of no objective morality that yes, they were right. No.
The implication is that there is some sort of universal standard, and I'm saying there isn't. There is no universal standard.
Right. So same question.
Right. 200 years from now, people are all vegans. They take care of animals. They say, were those people eating cheeseburgers right?
Yes.
There's to kill baby cows, really.
So the issue is, look.
That's the same thing. Same thing with homosexuality. It was wrong 100 years ago. It's right today. Same thing with I don't know.
So I think that's a really important distinction that you're making here. Is that if there is no God, then there is no objective morality. Therefore, what was right before is wrong now, and what is wrong now is right at another time. And there's no way that we can look at another culture at a different time period and say they were wrong. All we can say is they are different. And so if we are right to eat meat now, just like they were right to own slaves back in the 1800s. We don't like it now, but they were right doing it then because it was right for them. That is the consistent view if there is no God. That's that you can't. Right. So you can't actually.
Let's say that is the case. Culture. Let's say that is the case, exactly as you describe it. How could you tell the difference?
We can tell the difference in a few different ways. I think that we can. Number one, I think the fact that there is debates and discussions argues that there's at least some sort of standard that we're trying to understand, and we recognize, that people break standards, and therefore we're going to argue that someone was wrong because we actually think that there are certain standards that were broken. And so that's why we argue that women's suffrage and these sort of things were wrong, because women should have had the right to do certain things, and to take away that right was wrong. And so we believe this. We also recognize, I think, that there's obvious moral standards. I think that there's certain things, not all of them are obvious, but there are certain things like torturing babies for fun is wrong. And I think that is just obvious, and that is something that we can see. I think that when we mistreat in the Bible, people, though, right? I think that hold on a second. I think that we can mistreat people. I think that we measure value systems, and we often use language like one system is better than another. We atheists always say the way we live today is better than they lived in the 1800s. We measure systems as if there is a standard by which they can be measured to measure these value systems. And so we use language where we speak as if there is some sort of external standard. We also recognize people often say certain things, but we recognize that when we are mistreated, we react a certain way. So there's no actual right and wrong until someone steals my car. And then all of a sudden I want to believe that that's wrong. Not just that's my opinion, I don't like it, but we actually want them punished and judged for doing something, for violating us, as if there is something to violate, that there's an external standard like you should not violate people. I think that there is also a sense of moral obligation that we have, that there are things that we ought to do and things that we ought not do. I think that we often make excuses for inappropriate moral behavior because we recognize that's not something I should have done. And so we make excuses for it. And so I think that there are these deep-seated understandings and ways in which we reflect upon reality and language that we use that feeds off this idea that there are external standards, that we have a better moral system, that we are improving, that we are growing, that we are learning, and that improves or that assumes that there is something outside of us.
So you think, for example, that slavery is obviously wrong? No question.
Yes.
So why did they have a debate then?
So I would say it's obviously
wrong. Or that
wrong.
Women should definitely have vote. Why did they have a debate about it? Why didn't they all just say, yes, it's obviously wrong, we shouldn't do it?
So I think that there are, so maybe I rephrase what I said slightly about slavery. I think that there are obvious wrongs that we should be able to look at and recognize that as wrong. And so for today, slavery is an obvious wrong for us today, but I mean, virtually every single culture in all of human history owned slaves and didn't see it as a problem. So it wasn't as obvious to them.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that it wasn't wrong. Just like in the past, people believe certain other things.
So how can you
wrong.
tell a difference? How can you tell the difference between what we think now and what they think then?
Well, how do we tell a difference is because we actually have an outside standard by which we can judge these actions. So in a Christian view, we can look at the fact that, in Genesis 1:27, God creates male and female in his image, that human beings are valuable. We're called not to murder them. We can look at Exodus, that to steal a man and to own him or to be found in possession of a stolen man should receive the death penalty. We can look at examples in Scripture that talk about people are valuable human beings created in the image of God and should not be considered as property in that sense. And so we understand that. And yes, people twist it to achieve their own purposes or to live the life that they want to live or to do what they want to do. But I think that we can, if we step back and look at it more objectively, we can see the bias and the cultural conditioning that is in effect on different issues around the world. And so now there are...
How can we see?
Just like a jury can look at a criminal record of a trial and say, I think this person is guilty, whereas that person's mom may go, he's innocent, right? We recognize there are sometimes you're too close to this, but if you take a step back and look more objectively at the evidence, that person may say, this evidence is obvious. And the whole jury may say, this evidence is obvious. He is guilty. And his mom may go, no, I think he's innocent. And we recognize bias can be at play. But if you take a step back and look objectively, there are things that are more obvious than others. Now, not everything is obvious.
But there is no objective. There's no objective thing, though. Jury in 1700 would return a slave to his master, and jury today would put master in prison. So there's no. You're saying there's some objectivity, but you cannot point to it. And in fact, they had Bible back then too, right? And they still argued about slavery. So it's not Bible itself is not objective either, because you can quote it any way you want.
So
but there's no objective morality.
So it seems like there's a misunderstanding you have on what objective means. Objective does not mean there is not debate, right? Objective does not mean there is not confusion. Objective does not mean there is not disagreement. Objective means the truth of the statement does not depend on my opinion, thoughts, or feelings. Right. So so just because people debate about it does not mean it's not objective. Just because it's not clear does not mean it's objective. Right. There's things in quantum mechanics that are not very unclear, that we don't know how things function or why things work the way that they work. But that doesn't mean it's all subjective and relative. We just recognize there are things that are more difficult to figure out than other things. And so when it comes to morality, I think where this debate becomes muddied is that, look, in order for there to be objective morality, there only needs to be one thing that is actually objectively wrong, independent of what we think and feel about it. And what often happens in this debate is we look at these very culturally divisive topics like you brought up of homosexuality or slavery, and we look at what other cultures have done throughout human history, and we look at these things that maybe have been muddied or debated over, and to say, see, there's no objective morality, rather than looking at clear-cut examples that we can more easily understand and say, look, if there's one thing that we can recognize as morally wrong, then you have objective morality. So let's just stick, for example, to like torturing babies for fun. Right. If a culture says, look, we like to take 3-month-old babies and just burn them and punch them in the face and rip out their fingernails and poke at their eyeballs just for the mere pleasure and joy of it. And we think this is good. Someone who holds the subjective social contract theory of ethics would have to say, yes, for you, that is good. I don't like it, but yes, you're right. That is good for you. And I would say that is not something, I would say to make that claim goes against every fabric of our body, that we should be able to look at that and recognize an obvious moral standard exists that you should not torture babies for fun. And
But
this is also why we can look at cultures that have a consistent moral framework, like virtually every culture throughout all human history has seen murder as wrong. Now, their definition of what murder is slightly changes, but virtually every culture has seen that the unjustified taking of innocent human life is wrong.
What do you mean unjustified?
Without a good reason.
The point is, the Bible says, happy is he who dashes your infants against rocks. So there, that just kind of blows your example right out of the water. The point is, if you say something's objective, you have to demonstrate that it's objective, right? If you say black holes exist, you have to make some sort of a measurement that proves a prediction and so on. With morality, you can't do that. You think slavery is wrong, 200 years from now, people will say, eating meat was wrong. And there's just no way you can prove it. You just feel it. You're basically arguing your feelings. I feel this is wrong. And you say unjustified murder is wrong. Well, what is justified? Like, is it bombing people in Gaza justified? Hitler thought he was justified. Just that justified carries a lot of weight there. You know what I mean?
So Mirza, I gave you 8 reasons why objective morality exists. And you come back and said, all your answer is I feel it. Which one of my 8 reasons was I feel like it's wrong, therefore it's wrong?
You're saying, well, okay.
I gave you 8 reasons for objective morality.
Remind me of your reasons. I'm kind of, like what? For example, you said there's some sort of objective like sense of a jury or something, but no, the jury in a different sense would say something else. Then you say, but it's all based on feelings. I know you feel strongly about this, but demonstrably, people in other times and areas felt strongly about things which we think are clearly wrong. This is undisputable.
To be clear, I'm not arguing because I feel strongly, therefore it's wrong. That's not my argument.
What are you arguing?
Because I've been trying to be clear, and in fact, I've agreed virtually with every single chapter of Armin's book that just because you believe something or feel something doesn't make it true. Our feelings can be wrong and our feelings can be off. And that's why I would say that people who feel like slavery is good, they are wrong because their feeling does not make something true. Now, what I think you're maybe getting that argument from when it comes to me is that there are certain feelings that are evoked when we experience things and when we see something. Right. And so when I look at a child being tortured for fun, that is going to evoke something in us where we go, that is wrong. What I'm saying, though, is the argument is flipped. What I'm saying is because torturing children for fun is wrong, it is going to evoke this anger and this feeling in us if I just know that's wrong. My feeling doesn't make it wrong, but my feeling of it's wrong is an accurate reflection of what it actually is. And so just like my feeling... It's
still your feelings. How can feeling be objective? How can your feeling be objective? And like I said, Bible said, happy is he who dashes your infants against rocks. And, there's like so many times where, people kill children for fun, like because they belong to another tribe or whatever. Like in the Homer's Odyssey, or not Odyssey, the other one. Like when Greeks took over Troy, they threw Helen's kids off the tower or something, and this was praised that there is nothing outside that you can point to and say, aha, this is objective. You say, oh, killing kids feels wrong, but then some other people did exactly that. And there's no way to objectively say he's right. Like, how would you explain it to a computer? How would you explain it to a computer who has no sense of morality that killing kids is wrong, or that eating meat is right, or that... I know you feel strongly about it and you feel it's real because it's part of your nature. It's part of your character. It's part of everything. And it's not arbitrary. Objective is not arbitrary. it is important. It's, I don't want to see kids hurt. I love my kids. I love all kids, and I feel strongly about it. But I cannot demonstrate that there's something outside of human mind that says it's wrong. And same thing with rocks. If rock crushes a kid, is that wrong? Is that morally wrong? No, because a rock did it, and there's no force that protects kids outside of human minds.
Okay,
I know, but I think we might be going in circles.
A little bit. Now, let me just see if anyone else wants to call in really quickly, and I do have to end here in like 5 minutes, so this will probably be the last call.
Right.
But are you saying that for me to murder a child is equal to a rock falling off a cliff and murdering a child because there is no sense there? There's no objective morality. Just like a rock falls off and kills a child, and that's not wrong. Me killing a child is not wrong. That's what it sounded like, and I want to make sure I understand you correctly.
Well, by wrong, meaning I feel it's wrong, you feel it's wrong. The rock doesn't feel it's wrong. It's only outside our human minds that it's wrong. And that's an important point, because human minds are important. They are part of how we see the world. You cannot experience the world. You can only experience your mind. So it feels real to you. But if a life of a child had any value outside of us, then rocks would be reluctant to crush children as opposed to animals or objects.
Okay, so while I would agree that our feelings can be wrong, our feelings can deceive us, would you agree with me that our feelings sometimes can be an accurate reflection of reality? So, for example, that I feel sad when something sad happens. And my feeling sad doesn't make that thing sad, but because that thing is sad. So, for example, let's say a grandparent passes away and someone feels sad. Is the act of that, is the event of the grandparent dying only sad because the person feels sad? And if the person felt happy, then that would be a happy thing? Or is the grandparent dying actually, objectively, a sad thing, and therefore it is evoking a real reflection of reality of the feeling of being sad? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the sadness is how you respond to the event. It's not part of the event. It's like,
so loved ones dying is not actually sad.
Sad in a sense that you feel sadness, not sad in a sense that there's something about that event that the sadness is your response. It's like the purpose of chair is to sit on. Is the purpose inside its atoms and molecules? No, there's no purpose inside the chair. It's inside your mind. Sadness is inside your mind. It's how you see the world. It's not the world itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say yes. It is a feeling that is in our mind. The question is do our feelings have an accurate reflection or representation in reality or not? And so I think this is kind of maybe a good place
accurate
to end,
for our mind. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So I think it's
accurate for our mind, right?
Well, I would say an accurate representation of reality. And so I think this leads to, what maybe is the big disagreement between us. And I think what is helpful overall in this conversation is that I would argue that within a Christian view, and if God exists, then there actually is objective, transcendent, outside of us, meaning, value, and purpose that exists in reality. And therefore, to live meaningful, value, and purposeful is to align ourselves with God's objective, meaning, value, and purpose. It seems like what you're saying in your view, though, is that there is no objective, meaning, value, and purpose. The only thing that exists is in our minds. And therefore, a loved one passing away or getting cancer and passing away or owning slaves, those things are not objectively sad or right or happy or wrong. It is whatever we feel about it. And that is really the most that we can say, is that we have a personal, subjective response to something in the world. And whatever our response is what gives a truth value to that thing. So if I believe slavery is good, then slavery becomes good. If I believe it's bad, it becomes bad. If I think this event is a happy thing, it is happy for me. And if I think it's a sad thing, it's sad for me. But there is no way that we can actually know for sure if my actions, my beliefs, or my feelings or thoughts are an actual representation and reflection of reality. And I think that's where we would disagree and see things differently.
So reality, it's how you experience reality. And I experience it the same way because we both have human minds and not cockroach minds. That's what I'm saying. It's how we navigate reality. You cannot separate your perception from reality. Let me ask you this. Let's say there is no universal truth, there's no universal purpose, it's all the way I say. How would reality look different? In case that there's a universal morality, universal truth, any case that there isn't. Where would the difference in reality be? How would the world be different if
Then
one was right?
Yeah, then I would say that our lives would become objectively meaningless, absurd, and pointless. And therefore, to live the lives that we are currently living, where we believe there is meaning, purpose, and value, we would be delusional. We would be deluding ourselves. We would be fooling ourselves, and we should be pitied.
No, you wouldn't be. You would still have those things, but they will come from you and your nature. They won't be universal from outside you. They'd be part of you.
Right. So it's not actually real.
It's real to you. Not,
yes, but that's the whole point. It's ultimately meaningless, right? It's the same thing of saying, I'm going to paint the wall of the house. I'm going to paint the house right before it gets blown up. Or I'm going to organize the deck chairs on the ship. Anyone would look at the person organizing the deck chairs, and you could say, well, yeah, that's meaningful for the person. They're organizing deck chairs. They want to do that. Go for it. But you would go, right, but that's absurd. That's crazy. Why would you spend your time organizing deck chairs on a ship that's going to sink in 5 minutes? That's ludicrous. And if the person goes, so this is the most meaningful thing I can do, you would go, that's crazy. And that's not just an opinion. What they're doing is actually absurd because the ship is sinking.
Is it though? Let me ask you this though. Let's say I'm right and you realize that I'm right. Are you going to stop going to work? Are you going to stop feeding your children? Are you going to stop doing things you care about? If I'm right?
No. And that's where I agree with
exactly
Armin, that these are, but that's not the point, right?
That is the point. The world does not look any different.
You're right in that people would still set goals. They would still work hard to improve their lives. They would still try to enjoy their time on earth. The point is, the issue ultimately, well, you don't need to believe in God to do those things. And so you're right. I would continue working because I got to make money and put food on the table. Ultimately, though, it doesn't matter. Ultimately,
right.
there is no end that it really matters. And this is where, William Lane Craig makes the distinction here in his conclusion. If I can just read this really quickly and I'll give you the last word because I just went over time. But he says, look, according to the Christian worldview, God does exist. Man's life does not end at the grave. In the resurrected body, man may enjoy eternal life and fellowship with God. Biblical Christianity therefore provides two conclusions necessary for meaning, value, and purpose in life: God and immortality. Because of this, we can live consistently and happily. So I think that's the thing, is that we can live consistent and happy lives. If what you're saying is true, I could live a happy life, but I would not be consistent. And if I live consistently, I don't think I would live happy. So that's what I discussed at the beginning of the show, is if I am going to live happily, it's because I am believing that there is this meaning and purpose in life when there really isn't. And therefore I'm not consistent to say there is no meaning and purpose in life, but I'm going to believe there is to make myself happy. Therefore I'm not living consistently. He says, thus the biblical Christianity succeeds precisely where atheism breaks down. And then he just says this, and I'll finish here and I'll give you a thought because I'm over time. But I wanted to finish my show with this. I'm just leaving you on the show. So thanks for just sticking out here really quick with me.
Oh, he says, no problem.
He says, now I want to make it clear, I've not yet shown a case for biblical Christianity to be true, but what I've done is clearly spell out the alternatives. If God does not exist, then life is futile. If God in the Bible does exist, then life is meaningful. And I think this is the same thing that Paul argues in 1 Corinthians 15, where he says, look, if Jesus has not been risen from the dead, then Christians should be pitied. Right? For Christians to go around believing in a God who rose Jesus from the dead, we would believe false things and people should pity us. And that's how I think atheists often look at me when they comment in my comment section, is like, poor you, ignorant, dumb little Christian. And I'm almost pitied for believing false things. Right, and I think the same is true as here, is if you are right, then we should be pitied because we are believing that life is meaningful, valuable, and important, and that I should work hard to make the best of it, when ultimately life is futile and it is meaningless.
Maybe that's just your vanity, though. Why does your life have to have cosmic meaning? Why can't it have local meaning to you, your family, your community, your values? Why do you need universal meaning? And I
So
just
that's a
vanity
great, that's a
mindset.
great,
And also
that's a,
asking about meaning of life is like asking the color of life or rate of return of life.
right.
It
So you
just
mentioned that
makes
at the
no
beginning.
sense.
So you mentioned
Right.
that at the
The
beginning. Let
meaning
me just
is
address.
to somebody.
Okay, so let me address
Right.
your final question really quickly. Then I'll give you the last thought. I'm not going to be able to take any more questions because again, I'm 5 minutes over.
Right. I'm sorry.
Why not just have local meaning? Well, if there is no God, then that's all that there is. That's all there is, right? And so that's
Right.
what it is, and that's all that I have. The
Right.
point is I don't think we actually live like that. I think that we don't actually believe that to be true. And I think the way in which we live and we talk and we interact assumes that there actually is this greater transcendent meaning. And so to live a life that is consistent and to live a life that is happy and to actually ground this objective meaning, purpose, and value that we see in the world and that we live according to requires there to be some sort of God that does exist. And why not just local? Okay, well, if atheism is true, then that's all that there is. But that is a very sad world where I just going to end up dying and that's it. And that's where you get the claim YOLO, you only live once. Therefore, just have fun. And that is, I think, a very hopeless life. That is a hopeless life. And if that's all there is, man, that's sad. But I think that there actually is more. I think that we live like there is more, and there's actually good reason to believe that there is more, and that more is only found in a world in which God exists. And that's the point of the chapter. That's the point of the argument. And that's what Armin is responding to. Last comments, last words before I got to run.
Right. So if there is something more or there isn't something more, there's no way you can tell how world will be different. It will still look the same if you're mistaken or if you're right. There's right. Anyways, thank you for taking my call. I'm sorry to take up so much of your time.
Hey, Mirza, look, no one else called in, and if someone else wanted to jump in, they would have called, and so I gave you the time, and I hope that they enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed it, and so thank you. I really do appreciate it, and it's good to chat with you.
Hopefully that's because the link was broken in the beginning. Maybe that's the reason.
Maybe, okay. Yeah, I appreciate you for telling me that. I reposted it later on, but awesome. Well, have a good rest of your day, and I'll chat with you later.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
All righty. All right, guys, sorry I couldn't get to the rest of your questions, but hey, I thought that was really fascinating discussion, and I think there's a lot to think through. I posted some links in the description below. Again, you can check out Armin Navabi's book, Why There Is No God. You can look at the article from William Lane Craig. Just Google search The Absurdity of Life Without God by William Lane Craig, and that will come up. Otherwise, I will see you again here next week, and trying to continue to help you think deeply about God, Christianity, and Jesus, because they are worth thinking about. Other videos will pop up here to help you think about other issues, and until then, I will see you guys next week. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everybody.